This is a PSA to all watch nerds out there that they need to keep their eyes out. A lot of people have talked about this brand and I wanted to cover it, and this has more than impressed me. Furlan Mari only really hit the watch scene last year, as far as I understand it, in 2022, and they started it with a Mecha Quartz watch that looked as refined. It looked like a copy of a Patek Philippe, to be straightforward, and that's basically what it was, but at a very good price. I mean, they were selling it for about 500 bucks. It had these nice polished indices mounted on it. The dial layout looked correct. The proportions, I think, were what they nailed spot on. They didn't make the case overly large. They kept it pretty classic in its general size. And then the little details, I think they nailed, especially for a $500 watch. They were presenting a dress watch that had all of the kind of classic things that people like about, you know, Patek Philippe's or Vacherons or APs of old in a modern package for a reasonable price. And so, you know, you would think other brands have already done that, but micro brands traditionally tend to focus on, it seems, more sports watches because that is what's popular right now. But I think this was an interesting play at the whole dress watch elegant aspect. Now, I'm not a dress watch guy. I wear sports watches basically every single day of the year. Even if it's a nice event, like my brother's wedding is going to be in a couple days here, I'm probably going to wear a sports watch to it too. I mean, one that plays a little bit better, like my Explorer, but it doesn't mean that I'm immune to dress watches and what is appealing about them. This Furlan Mari stood out to me as soon as I saw the release announcement because of the lug style here. Now, these have a French name that I really don't know how to pronounce, but they're basically what's called a cow horn lug. And it means that it's got this kind of teardrop shape to the lug itself. And I've looked at a lot of different watches, and typically they have a pretty flat, straight look to them because they'll mill the case as one big shape, and then they can cut away those lugs in the same shape. It's a lot easier to do it that way. When you're trying to do something like this, you have to either polish away or build them separate, solder them together, and then actually polish it again to get this, basically the way the lug comes back in towards the case the way that it does. And the overall shape and architecture of the lug is hard to do, not to mention the fact that it's got this pretty sharp brush on the side, and then it's polished around the top and around the back side of the same lug. And so this is typically the lug style you'll find on more high-end pieces or older pieces that carry originally a high dollar figure. And so that's originally what drew me to this, is because I thought that was an attention to detail that you just don't see. People talking about lugs is rare within the watch space. Typically it's movement, it's dial, it's bezel action, and then there's also bracelet as well. But the lugs is something people don't usually talk about. So I really liked that. That drew my attention. Plus the general sector dial layout is something that I've liked about the Longines model that's out right now, the sector dial. And so this drew a lot of that same inspiration into it. Now, yes, it is very, very similar to other Patek references that are like this, as well as other dress watches around the same time frame. It has a lot of the same hallmarks with the Breguet numerals and the overall handset style, as well as obviously the sector, but that doesn't mean that it's not well done. And what I admire the most about this is how they achieved the lug shape and style, as well as the way the dial presents itself. And then I have some negatives at the end. So the way that the lugs were achieved was actually building them separate, and then they basically get inserted into the case and screwed down. If you see my video here, when I take the case back off, you'll see 3 screws are holding what's essentially a bridge that's keeping these lugs attached to the actual case itself, which is pretty ingenious that you could just mill them separate and then add them after the fact, that you could then achieve this sort of look without the same sort of level of expertise and money involved. As I stated before, the dial layout is beautiful. I mean, it's pretty classic. It's incredibly legible. The fact that it's got these minute counters around the perimeter and all these sections laid out on the dial, it makes it very, very easy to read the time quickly. Now, the hour hand is a little harder to see the differentiation between the hour hand and the minute hand. So if you know generally what time it is, it makes it a little easier because you just look at the minute hand. So I do wish the hour hand was a little bit more differentiated in some way. Maybe it was a little bit thicker or a little bit shorter even, just to make it easier for me to notice. The feel of the movement is nice. This is a Lejour movement, and that basically just means it's made by a manufacturer in Switzerland. Lejour does a lot of other different movements for different watch companies, all up and down in price. Some are really, really expensive, and some are not as expensive. The movement itself is Swiss made, but I think the reason why they picked them is because they could then achieve this 10.5 inch thickness which I think was kind of a necessity. If they went any thicker, then the way this is designed with this kind of saucer or circle with these lugs attached, I think it would have looked not very refined. If they'd gone any thicker, it would have looked like a big case with these lugs, these nice lugs attached to it. And that kind of leads me into my negatives. So the one thing I don't like about this is the overall bezel look. Now, that may be because I'm just not used to dress watches. It may be because this is just not my thing, but typically when I've seen dress watches, they have a bezel that's sloped and then a back that's sloped so that the mid case is relatively thin. So you get the look of almost like a clamshell, that you have the top and the bottom meeting as close together as possible. But because of the way this is designed, you've got a flat brushed bezel around the front, which I wouldn't even know if I'd call it a bezel because it's almost invisible other than in the light. It is still there, but it looks semi-unfinished, I would say. So I wish that it had more of a sloping taper to the actual bezel itself into the mid case, which would then make this mid case itself a little bit shallower. This one is brushed around the sides of the mid case, which I think is fine. This looks like a 20s, 30s looking watch in the fact that it's got all these brushed elements and the overall design of it. It looks like a step from early wristwatches into modern wristwatches. And so if that's the design they were going for, I think they nailed it, but it looks a little bit too much like a clock, I would say, in my mind, unfortunately, because of the way that mid case is designed. That's my biggest gripe about it. The secondary gripe that's also very, very minor is the actual crown itself. It feels like they didn't knock the edges on the crown just a little bit, so it seems actually a little bit sharp on the tips of this crown knurling. I like that it's grippy, I like that I can use it, but I think they could have knocked it just a little bit more so that it wasn't as sharp. That would be my only other piece that I would change. One thing I didn't mention that is also really nice is these lugs. Not only do they have a cool shape, but the way they're designed actually allows for two different straps. They put two lug holes in here, so you can actually attach both straps. One strap has a lug hole set in a certain area to make straight straps look a lot nicer with the case and actually work. The other ones are set closer in for you to actually use these curved straps so that they would sit in these lug holes a little tighter and closer to the case. And that level of detail I have never seen. I've never seen two holes for lugs on the side of this case. And it's really nice. I have never really used curved straps before, but I really like how they look on the actual case itself. So that, again, as attention to detail was really nice. So what are my overall thoughts? I would say that this is definitely a great package for someone that wants a vintage aesthetic in a modern watch. I really like it. I really, really, really do. I like their overall design theory. I like the way this looks. I like the dial layout. I like the lugs. I like the actual way that these straps integrate. The quick release is nice, but I'm talking about those two different lug holes. I like the overall feel of the movement. It's a little gritty, but I like the overall feel. I love the raised indices, the brigade numerals. A lot of this speaks to me, but does it speak to me $1,200? I'm not quite sure, and that may just be my issue that I'm just not a dress watch guy, but I would see myself going more towards vintage Omega as opposed to something like this for my taste. But if you're looking at sector dials in general, this thing is pretty great. I mean, it's an amazing value. It does make me feel a lot of those higher end watch brands, and I don't have an already associated brand name with it, so I'm not downgrading or upgrading it based on the price of the way I associate it. I just see it as a great watch. Please do me a favor and subscribe. Again, the more people I have that are subscribed, the less I have to personally buy watches like this in order to talk about them. I'm curious, so I do pay for it, but I would prefer to have them send it to me if they can. Any questions, leave them down below. Let me know what you guys think about Furlan Mari. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.